Welcome, everyone, to the July 16th meeting of Economic Matters. Here today is myself, Alderman Savage, and then joining us as a guest is Alderman Arnett. So before we begin, I am going to amend the agenda. We are going to go in reverse order from what was posted. We will start with O 2025. Sale of city-owned property at 932 Spa Road and 935 Spa Road, Lot 1. Then we will go to O1925, regulation of tours in historic Annapolis. Then we will go to O1725, limiting short-term rentals per block face. And then we will go to O1225, prioritizing affordable spending through expansion of Financial Advisory Commission duties. Do I have a motion to accept the agenda as amended?
So moved.
I will second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Next, I will ask for an approval of the amendment, the minutes from our May 21st meeting. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second. All those in favor? Aye. All right. So up first is going to be O2025, sale of city-owned property at 932 Spa Road and 935 Spa Road. We have some folks here from city staff. If you will please come up to the table. I did do a roll call.
Yeah.
We're not. Put it on the record. All right. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. If you three would please introduce yourselves and your role for the public and for the record.
Ashley Leonard, Assistant City Attorney for the City of Annapolis.
Allison DiManio, Department of Public Works, City of Annapolis.
Christina Alexander, Director of Operations for the Resilience Authority of Annapolis and Anne Arundel County.
Thank you. So welcome. Ms. Leonard, can you please give yet another committee a little bit of background on the sale of this property?
So we are looking, it's several parcels, all on 932 and 935 Spa on opposite sides of the road. It's a multi-stepped project that involves, so the 935 parcel is in the process of being subdivided into lots 1 and lots 2. Lots 2, as you can see, is closer to sort of like the field areas. And then across the street is 932, which is actually two different parcels. It's parcel 358 and parcel 62. And so those are it's 3 parcels right now. It will be 4 parcels once we get through the subdivision. We are looking to sell lot 1, as well as parcel 62 and parcel 358. It's the tax ID numbers and the addresses are a little wonky right now, but that we are working on that through subdivision. You'll notice that parcel 358 is address 932 Spa Road, but its tax ID number is actually the same as across the street, because at one point, all of that was one big parcel, and at the time there was no road through it, and the state gave it all the same tax ID number. So once the subdivision is complete, that little parcel 358 will be getting its own new tax ID number, and when we subdivide lot 1 and lot 2, those will probably also be getting different tax ID numbers. So then you will have 4 parcels with each with their own tax ID numbers, and 3 of them will be going over to the Resilience Authority, and we will be holding on to lot 2.
Thank you. So the key component is, why are we going through with this procedure? Why can we not hold on to these pieces of land ourselves?
I can give you a brief overview. The experts are sitting next to me, though. In short, we want to do remediation, environmental remediation on parcel 62, parcel 358, and lot 1. As we are the property owner who caused the contamination on the property, that knocks us out of the running to get a lot of funding and grants, because they tend not to give grants to the people who caused the contamination. So in this case, one of the approved methods that's used by a lot of local jurisdictions is that you sell the parcels to be remediated to a like a partner third party, usually a nonprofit. They apply for the grants, they get the funding, and they go through the whole remediation work themselves, which we would not be able to do as the property owner.
Is that partner here today?
Yes, they are here.
Oh, welcome. I love leading questions. Aren't they fun? So what will the Resiliency Authority be able to do that the city cannot do with this by receiving this grant?
Certainly, we are in a capacity to be able to accept a grant from the EPA for brownfield remediation, and that's the purpose that we would serve in this transaction. The property would be transferred for 7 years, or for the time that it takes the remediation to be completed, whichever is earlier, and then it would revert back to the city. So our role is very limited. I have prepared a handout that I've provided to staff as well as older people. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer. I have extra copies if you'd like.
Ms. Jackson, could you please give a copy to Alderman Arnett? Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. So I understand there's a timeline, or we're under a little bit of a pressure for time in order to receive this grant. Could we get into some of that?
Do you know the deadlines better than me?
Yeah, so the grant application is due in November. And so the property will need to be shifted over prior to that grant application so that the applicant could be the Resilience Authority.
The grant is due in November, you said?
Yeah, so the grant is due in November, and then there are several milestones that we need to qualify for the grant, including community outreach, which we intend to start doing in September and November. But the primary goal is to make sure that the property is transferred prior to the grant due date.
Genuine question instead of a leading one. Why have we not done the community outreach already?
Because we've been working with our environmental team to determine exactly what is on site. And we're currently working with them through MDE and their voluntary cleanup program.
Okay, thank you. That is helpful to know. So in regards to the contamination of property itself, I know we have soil contamination. How deep into the soil does that contamination go? Are we aware?
We have a work session with this group on Wednesday, and at that time, our environmental team will be presenting the full plan, and they'll be able to give all the details of depth of contamination, types of contamination, and potential remediation options. I'd like to defer until that time when our environmental experts can address that question.
So I guess that leads into my follow-up question, or answers my follow-up question of, do we know if there's groundwater contamination, as well as that question for Wednesday of next week?
It is, but I do know that they did additional testing to ensure that there was no groundwater contamination. So they came back with no groundwater contamination. It's particularly in the soil, and then sometimes those particles can become fluid if it's sedimentation.
Now, one last question, Alderman, and then I will yield the floor to you. A question that has come up in other committees is we want to ensure after we sell off this property that we are able to get it back. And it's not that we don't trust our partners in the Resilience Authority. It's just we want to make sure that we're being good stewards of our public land, and things happen. We have plans for this public land, and we don't want it to slip out of our fingers and not be used for the wonderful goals that we have. What is in this legislation, or what is in our agreements with the Resilience Authority, either in the past or coming up with the sale, that guarantees that we get it back for the dollar that we are selling it for?
we didn't put it in the deed because generally in deeds we can put the reverter clause in. So we will put a reverter clause that the property comes back. I believe that the current amendment language is no later than 7 years. What is the amendment that was proposed? So we will put a reverter clause in. So that will be legally binding in the deed that it has to come back. As for the price, generally with reverter clauses, you don't put a price in for the reverter. So that is a little bit more, I guess, of an open area, but the reverter clause itself will ensure that the property does come back to us.
Are there other steps that we could do to hypothetically, let's say there's a 100% changeover of the Resiliency Authority and they all become really interested in for-profit real estate development and refuse to sell it back to us for anything less than $100 million. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just coming up with a scenario. Is there anything that we can do to prevent this completely outlandish will not happen scenario from happening?
Yeah, if you have thoughts, go for it.
Certainly. Well, for one thing, we would not be able to profit off of this particular project because of the limitations of the EPA grant. I understand that that's at least one limitation. Also, if the Resilience Authority was to get into, flipping real estate, let's just say, we would put our tax-exempt status at risk. We enjoy a tax-exempt status as a government instrumentality with the IRS. But that's only when we engage in traditional governmental activities. If we were to engage in business activities, such as flipping a piece of real estate for profit, we would put that exempt status at risk. So I don't believe that a future board would want to do that or the current board.
Now, a potential more realistic scenario, we can't turn a profit, but cleaning a brownfield site is not inexpensive. Even if the $4 million grant from the Brownfield Fund is given to you, that can definitely take care of a lot of costs, but this can potentially cost up to $10 million. Let's say it costs up to that full $10 million, the Brownfield Fund gives you that $4 million. You've still invested $6 million in remediation. Does that hypothetically mean to not turn a profit, you can sell it back to the city for that $6 million? You wouldn't be turning a profit, you would just be recouping the loss.
Well, I think it depends on where the funding comes from. The Resilience Authority is, so if we were to say take out a loan for the remaining costs for the remediation and then pay off that loan with a sale, is that kind of the scenario that you're describing?
I suppose so, yes.
So I think it would be determinant on the terms of the loan at the time that funding was acquired. That's not our plan, as far as seeking funding for this project. We are able to seek funding from a variety of sources, including private foundations, and so we intend to look into those sources if we have funding gaps. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I can answer your question about that particular hypothetical and whether or not the 600 or 6 million would be something that we would realize as a profit.
All right. If possible, I don't know if you'll be present for our joint meeting with Rules and City Government at the Environmental Matters Committee next Wednesday, but if possible, if you could potentially look into that and come up with some answers for that. That is all the questions that I have for this legislation. I'm first going to yield the floor to my colleague, Alderman Savage, and then I'll yield the floor to our guests. Thank you for joining us, Alderman Huntley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just first, I guess.
I acknowledged him at the beginning of the meeting because he wasn't late, Alderman Huntley.
Before I get started, is there any particular, limitations you want on questions as far as like coming from the Economic Matters?
I think this is such a large piece of legislation. It has come in front of committees that we've all been a part of. This is a very complex piece of legislation. It's a very big deal. I want us to get what we feel we need to get to the bottom of this. I ideally want to pass it out of economic matters today because I do understand there is time sensitivity to it. Even if we go no recommendation, I never like being the holdup in a committee. But what I see that means today is we need to get to the bottom of that. And if that means economic matters is here until 10 o'clock, so be it.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you. All right. So some of my questions, let's see. So as far as the reverter clause, can we get that required expressly in the ordinance? Oh, can you turn your mic on, please?
To lines 15 through 25 is sort of all of the conditions in order for the legislative to be effective, which includes number 6 is the reverter clause. You also have number 1, the subdivision actually has to go through. So we did put that is in the ordinance now.
Oh, I see. Yeah, you did spell that out. Okay. All right.
And like I said, I believe there's an amendment on that it's going to be shall revert to the city no later than 7 years, I believe is the current amendment.
So I guess, and hopefully we'll get the grant.
Well, hopefully the Resilience Authority will get
the Resilience. Thank you. The Resilience Authority will get the grant. But under the scenario where that we don't get the grant or some other wrench gets thrown into things, which these days can very well happen with federal government, what happens with this ordinance? So is everything not executed until the grant is actually
We would
awarded?
have to close ahead of time because in order to even apply for the grant, it has to be out of our ownership.
Okay.
EPA requires that the applicant be the sole property owner. So if you want to apply for the grant, you have to close on it.
Okay. Well, then perhaps I think we should put something in the legislation then that says if for whatever reason the grant is not awarded, then it gets reverted back to the city immediately.
We could add that as like a condition 7.
Okay.
Ms. Jackson, if you could please take a note of that as a requested amendment for Ms. Reuter. Thank you.
So thank you. And so as I understand it, the transfer, it'll allow the Resilience Authority to get the money potentially for the grant money. But I think I heard both of you mention it also. There may be a grant stipulation that it also requires the land to be fully remediated. So it would have to be fully remediated before it came back to the city per the grant conditions. Is that right?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
I'm still catching myself up on Brownfield. Brownfield is a very dense,
Yeah.
and which is why we have experts helping us with the application process. But yes, generally, you need to go through the full remediation process, or as far as, the EPA has to sign off on it before they close out the grant. So it would be up to EPA discretion.
Well, I think it's an important consideration because, again, what if for some reason, because the development's not even set in stone yet either, right? We don't exactly know what's going to happen there. We have authorized the use of the property for some housing, but we also authorized it for potential use for other city buildings. And so, and the remediation is supposed to happen, my understanding, at the same time as the development, right? We've had Crystal Spring going on for 10 plus years. What's to say we're even going to be able to complete the remediation and the development within 7 years?
That's just an estimate at this point. In theory, we can always record a confirmatory deed that would extend that out if need
Okay.
be.
Okay.
Because you can update deeds. I mean, they require a mutual agreement, but yes, we could go in and assuming that we need to extend it longer, that the Resilience Authority lets us know that, they need more than 7 years, we would go in and record a new deed.
do we need to say something in here that 7 years,
I mean,
basically plus or minus, depending
I mean,
on if the council wants to?
you could change page 2, line 24, instead of no later than 7 years, you could do it closer to the language Christina had indicated earlier, which is the earlier of 7 years or full remediation under the grant. If you don't want to have to go back and do another deed to extend.
All right, I guess it's not a bad thing to have come back to the council and if it needs to in 7 years, but yeah. But is that going to? But basically, it sounds like we may have if the development doesn't happen in the remediation in 7 years per the grant condition, we would probably have to extend that, right? Because the new owner would have to complete everything
Correct.
before it got turned back to city. So my other question with that is,
I'll draft that now. I'll leave it in case I abscond from the city to my successor.
The other question would be, because again, we haven't set in stone exactly how these properties are going to be utilized.
Well, you can do that with planning and zoning for you.
Well, no, that's not where I'm going is I don't want to tie our hands or potential future council because again, I personally don't want to see every single lot there be used for housing. I want to see some preserved for city use, such as like a transportation facility, right? And that's where I want to make sure if somebody else owns it, are we going to preclude ourselves from actually redeveloping it for city use because it's not owned by us anymore?
Zooming out a little bit. So we're going to be using the EPA funding to the remediation, but the plan is to use choice neighborhood funding for the redevelopment. And that will have its own sets of conditions about, because you can't do all one type of, you can't just slap down 300 of the same units. Choice neighborhood will have requirements where they want a more mixed use variety. And so if the plan is to use that funding will put another overlay of regulations onto how the property has to be used.
Right. But what if we wanted to build city facility on this property? Because it currently has public works buildings.
Yes.
What if we wanted to use one of the properties to put a new city facility? What are the implications since somebody else owns it?
Choice neighborhood funding is going to come through the Housing Authority for the City of Annapolis. They wouldn't have any ownership rights, so they would have to work in partnership with us and the Resilience Authority for what they would like to develop out there, which would give us a buy-in. Also keep in mind, just so you know, that the Resilience Authority, in addition to them being created in part by you guys, we also have a ongoing working sort of master MOU with them that sort of helps.
With who?
With the Resilience Authority. Okay. So the Resilience Authority and the City of Annapolis sort of have a master agreement that we work with on a regular basis that has sort of parameters for how we're going to partner on projects. So there's a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of sort of protective legal restrictions coming from all the different various grants, the different funding, partnership agreements that are already in place, how the Resilience Authority was set up, its governance structure was set up. So all of those coming in are all adding different layers of restrictions and guidelines for how the property would have to be developed.
Yeah, that kind of makes me more nervous, though, because again, if we were to want to put some kind of city facility on there, it sounds like we'd have to go through a lot more hoops as far as all the partners and looking at the MOUs.
Well,
the CNI program, HACA.
Keep in mind, we're keeping Lot 2. So Lot 2 is not going in the mix.
Yeah, but that's going to be ball field. So that's out of the question as far as any kind of facility.
And the other thing is, Choice Neighborhood's not going to use the whole area. Choice Neighborhood, it has to go through an application for specific areas, and they're also going to be doing other parts that are already of HACA-owned property. Will be all part of the package. I don't think anyone that I have worked with from the Resilience Authority, HACA, or their developers have any appetite to not allow the city to use the property in a collaborative way in that what we want to do it. At the end of the day, however, we could not do the choice neighborhood piece. We could just do the resilience authority piece. We are not locked in on the choice neighborhood part at this time.
Well, I mean, because this ordinance, I don't even think mentions CNI anywhere, does it?
Well, that's because that's where we would not be the primary applicant for that part. We would be a co-applicant with HACA being the lead, and that would be down the road. They can't finalize their application until more results from the remediation come in. So they can't even put in a full grant package until we get this started. If we don't get this started and get the remediation moving to see what is feasible, they won't be able to put an application in. They have to wait on us.
But they don't own
Correct, which is
property.
which is why it would have to be a multi-applicant.
Well, so what's the process when they seek to build the CNI redevelopment? What is the process going to be in that it'll be owned by Resilience Authority as the property owner, because presumably they will have a seat at the table to determine what gets built, although I imagine you want to.
We will
too
have a
much
seat at
preference,
the
but-
table as the local jurisdiction and the permitting authority.
Well, that's
at a
what
minimum.
I'm getting at. Is like presumably we would through the normal plan and zoning
Correct.
process, but again, it's how does it work with the CNI, because they'd still be building on somebody else's property? Is that the Resilience Authority is then going to have to give that? Are they going to give that property or simply give? Like, how does it work? It's because
They wouldn't. It would depend on how HUD, I believe it's HUD, structures the deal. But again, HUD is used to working with having multiple applicants on it. So my understanding, I could be wrong, Melissa Maddox is not here, but I'm pretty sure we are going to be a co-applicant on the application with them. So we will have a seat in that way, and that we will be tied in with that grant as well. Because the reality is they know that at some point the property will be coming back to the city.
But say it's all done, they build CNI at least on a part or even all the lot for sake of argument. It's completed. At that point, who owns the property?
I would presume that before the CNI is done that we will own the property, because that will take longer than the remediation.
So when it's done, you think
When it,
we will own the property?
I mean, you can't predict it.
At the Rules and City Government, we actually had the executive director from the Housing Authority here, along with the planning director. And I think I share your questions, but we got a lot of information. The plan is to develop on both sides of Spa Road, potentially develop, this is still planned, office space on the first floor with structured parking below. And then an undetermined amount of residential properties on one or both sides of Spa Road, part of which could be part of the CNI plan, part of which could be affordable housing, like we've talked about, the desirability of an affordable housing community. The point that was made by Burr Vogel at Rules is we can't do any of this or do anything there until we remediate. And getting $4 million is $4 million we don't have now. I worry about what if it's more, and I want to ask you about the phase two. But the remediation has to happen. We asked Director Evans Maddox, will she still be able to plan and move along with the CNI? And the answer was yes. And we can also move along and plan if we want to save part of it for affordable housing. It's the planning, but nothing can happen. You can have the best plan in the world. If it isn't remediated, we can't do anything.
But is that accurate though? Because I know that applies with the residential housing. If we want to put residential housing there, but if it's just another industrial use, like a public works use, does it have to be remediated?
Right. Or it could be a park. Yes, you're right.
So, and then I will give the floor back to you. Thank you for filling us for filling us in on that, Alderman Arnett. I'm going to answer your question on do you have to do that, and then I'll give the floor back to you for further questions to our panel. I reached out to a developer and a brownfield contractor who handles this type of thing professionally and specializes in it. And one of the things that they do is called risk-based remediation, where the remediation, the amount of remediation done is dependent on the use type, with residential being the most extreme, and then going down from there. So if we were to hypothetically put another industrial use site on it, they do some remediation, but probably not a whole lot, just to make sure everything's still kind of safe. But if we went all residential, it would be a very substantial cleanup job, because they want to keep that very safe, because that's where people's homes and families are.
Yeah.
Now, I'll give the floor back to you, unless Alderman Arnett, you have any further.
No, I would wait till it's our turn, but
All right.
I just thought it would be useful because I didn't get a chance to talk to you, Rob, but I thought that Rules got a much more fulsome explanation, a much better picture of what's going on, and we didn't get to talk about
Oh, excuse me, Eric, may I be?
Yes, ma'am.
Jackie Gall, Deputy City Manager for Resilience and Sustainability. As someone who has experience in this area with brownfields remediation, I can tell you that, yes, that is correct. There is a remediation requirement for any use. If you take a contaminated site, even if you do a ball field there, there's a level of remediation. If you do an industrial site, there's a level of remediation. Like if you look, for example, at our solar park, that is a contaminated site. There was required action there before we could even use it as a solar park with a fence around it, and continuing monitoring by MDE to a certain point with where they were satisfied. Same kind of thing applies to this with EPA.
Okay, so some form of remediation would have to get done
Some form of remediation, even on
for
the ball
any type
field.
of redevelopment.
Right.
Okay.
And they won't know that until they know exactly how they're going to be using this site. And I know there's some level of frustration there, like, well, how do we know what level of remediation is needed? We can't know until they decide exactly what they're going to do with the site. That will
Who's they?
what the city decides to do with that site, whether it's going to be all housing, part housing, commercial, industrial, a building facility, or a park.
Well, that's one of the things I'm getting at. It seems like that's the key question before we move forward with the grant application, and that's not been settled yet. I'm right now. I'm kind of firm. I really feel like we need to see the west side, which wake that up again.
Yeah.
So the handout. So I really want to keep the west side, the lot 358 and maybe part of 62 as a city use. The rest of it, I don't really care if it includes housing on the east side. But then again, I mean, I do think we need to get changing some of our parking requirement laws, because I've said this before, half of the CNI project is asphalt and the other half's rooftop. I mean, it's so much pavement there because of our arcane parking laws and other requirements. And it's also a lot of lost potential. So my point is, for that CNI to be successful, I don't think it requires this. I think it requires us to revisit our parking regulations so they can do more on that property in Eastport. Because I just don't want to tie our hands because again, if we're talking about Resilience Authority, working with you on looking at some transit alternatives for the city. This would be a key part for us to keep in that for a potential transit hub, because we already own it. But if we go ahead and commit it to housing, there goes that idea. We'd have to go look and purchase property elsewhere if there's even something left. Right? That's part of my concern. And the other concern is putting together this estimate for how much remediation is going to cost. It goes back, also depends on how we're planning on using this property, right? Because if it is industrial, it sounds like we do have to do some remediation, but I'm assuming it's going to be less than if we have to do residential. And so that's going to determine how much we're asking for as far as remediation costs.
Well, it also depends on where you're putting on the site the particular use, because to the chairman's question earlier about, well, how deep are the contaminants? That's different depending on where you are on the site. And the level of remediation is also determined in part on what type of contaminant it is, how dangerous it is, or how hazardous it is.
Yeah. And so when you talk about the cost of remediation, then you get into, well, how is that going to impact the overall C&I project? Because again, this plan is to get that remediated during the redevelopment, during the C&I process. Who's going to foot that bill? Presumably, we're trying to get this grant to pay for hopefully most of it, if not all of it. But if the remediation costs are going to be even more, how are we going to pay for that delta there in between what the grant costs or is covering and versus the actual remediation costs? And that, again, we won't know until we settle on how this property is going to be used. And we've not had any kind of conversation besides a resolution half a year ago or so, as far as determining how exactly we want to see this property used. And so, I'm not quite comfortable having this move forward with all those unknowns. I like the amendment because it gives us at least an out, but I don't know how else to address this situation.
I can comment on that when you get into larger debate on the legislation itself. But if you're done with your questions,
Yeah.
panel, Alderman, first I'm going to yield the floor to Alderman Arnett, and then I'll yield the floor to Alderman Huntley if he has any questions. Alderman Arnett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, again, we can't do anything there. Well, we can do a park or some non-uses. We really do have to get the remediation. I, too, worry about what if the remediation is more than $4 million. And so my question is, where did the $4 million number come from? I've, in fact, heard a number from former planning director that was $10 million, not $4. So is $4 million the limit of the grant that we can apply for?
Correct. $4 million is the maximum amount for this grant.
Suppose it's $6 million to do the to give us the option of doing residential. Are there other grant sources we can also be applying for? And can we do that while it's under the ownership of the Resilience Authority?
I'm not familiar with any specific grants, but the Resilience Authority, as I mentioned, can take funding from state, local, federal, and private foundations. So we'd be able to go after any funding that's out there.
So, and then I think the other question that I've had is what happens with the reverter once the city becomes the owner? And this is probably too far down the road to talk about this legislation, but we now revert back. We have a mitigated property. We're doing development, and part of that development would be part of the C&I program. So now we're owning the land, but the housing authority is owning the development, the improvements on there. And again, this may be premature to ask because it may not be directly relevant to this, but does it imply any obligation to the city because we are the landowner, unlike the situation with all the other housing authority properties?
That's a complicated question. I mean, it depends on the setup and how, depending how it's legally set up. Like, so for instance, if we do a ground lease to them, which just, basically says it's yours, you're in charge of it, then we could limit any sort of city liability for their actions on it. But it would kind of depend on the nature of the legal arrangement. And a lot of that would have to be, again, the C&I application is an option that's being considered, but it would require city approval to go
Right.
into it and participation. We would be a co-applicant, so we would have to be having larger agreements and discussions with HECA about how we wanted to move forward, if at all.
Thank you.
I like environmental remediation. No questions from me.
All right. Alderman Savage.
That's another question because the report recommends the phase 2 report. And I guess this might be a better question for next week, but it recommends the creation of a response action plan, if I'm not mistaken. So that's how that my understanding is going to take probably at least half a year, if not a year. It requires its own outreach. Do you have any information on such a plan? As far as who would pay for it, when would we get that done?
Currently the plan is for it to be done as part of the Spot Road CIP, or it could be done in conjunction with the CNI development. And it would have to be done in partnership with them because they would be utilizing their potential development to develop that plan. So if it's going to be, whether it's going to be housing or commercial buildings.
But are those, it seems like those would typically be done before the remediation. That's going to determine, I imagine, some of the remediation costs. Besides what type of development we want to do, response action plan is going to dictate, well, in this area you need to do X, Y, Z. You need to put in vapor intrusion mitigation or other engineered barriers or whatever. Those are all going to determine the cost of the remediation. Yet we don't even have. Is that a requirement of the grant, or like how much detail do we have to provide to them as far as here's what needs to get remediated, here's our plan for remediation? But it seems like we don't. How are we going to get that plan ready for November?
So according to the EPA, we had several meetings with them directly with Region 3, and they understand that we may not know exactly what's going to happen. So we just basically need to have a feasibility status. And our environmental team is working with the CNI team. As soon as they provide us with their feasibility of what they need, our environmental team can provide us with a feasibility of potential environmental requirements for remediation.
Okay.
And Alderman Savage, I just sent you some general response action plan that I got from the contractor I reached out to earlier today for you to read at your leisure.
Thank you.
All right. If there are any further questions from members on my panel, we had someone reach out to us. Is Mr. Warden here? Mr. Warden, welcome, sir. If you wouldn't mind, please coming up to the podium. I understand you want to give some testimony on behalf of the Annapolis Heritage Commission. As a reminder to you and to anybody else who wishes to give testimony either on this legislation or any other legislation coming up in front of our agenda today, we give everyone 3 minutes to testify. I am very, very much a stickler on that 3-minute limit. And then if members of our committee or our guests have questions, they are free to ask you, and you have as much time as you wish to answer those questions. So when I get notification from Ms. Jackson that the timer is ready, please introduce yourself and your address for the record, and then begin.
I'm on?
Yes, sir.
Good evening. I'm Robert Worden. I'm Vice Chair of the Heritage Commission, and I'm here on behalf of the Commission, which by resolution passed on July 2nd, directed me to testify before this committee. The Heritage Commission asks simply that an archaeological assessments be made at the Spa Road DPW sites prior to and during remediation and construction. The 8-acre eastern portion has been greatly changed over time with grading and fill. An archaeological assessment should still be done, not for the entire site, but especially around the areas bordering on the Spa Creek headwaters, which I believe are probably less disturbed. The rest of my comments are directed to the western portion, the 3.73-acre parcel. It once was a part of a 192-acre farm that extended from West Street along Spa Road to Hilltop Lane, Hilltop to around South Cherry Grove back up to West, and west back to Spa Road, 192 acres, except for the piece that's now St. Mary's Cemetery. This was John Walton's farm. He purchased in the 1840s and 1860 and used by the City Hotel, which is on the site of the Noah Hillman Garage and the Masonic Temple on Conduit Street. He had 40 acres of apple and peach orchards. He grew corn, cabbage, celery, turnips, watermelons, cantaloupes, and strawberries. He raised crops of oats, clover, timothy for straw and silage. The farm had hogs, poultry, cattle, sheep, horses. He had 40 acres of chestnut, hickory, oak, and pine woodland. This is very much a working farm of its day. The DPW site itself, which is just a small piece of it, had orchards on it, a farmhouse, a variety of farm buildings, and is adjacent to Walton's Pond, which he dammed up the headwaters of Spa Creek to make an ice pond there to serve his hotel in the winter. This work was done by the enslaved people of African descent. 28 enslaved men, women, and children lived and worked on this farm, at the hotel downtown, and in the family home on Francis Street. Between 1861 and 1864, during the Civil War, Walton's farm was used as a camp of instruction by Union troops who were being trained to go fight the war in North Carolina and Virginia. Infantry, artillery, and cavalry soldiers trained on the property with live firing and maneuvers. When a Confederate attack on Annapolis was feared in 1864, soldiers built entrenchments on the farm. Part of the farm was used as a camp for paroled POWs. The soldiers took down Walton's fences, raided his woodland for building huts and for firewood. They ate his crops, they devastated his orchard. They denied economic well-being of Walton and his enslaved workforce. After the war, Walton sought war claims. Is that 3 minutes?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I think I've...
Thank you. And for my colleagues, Mr. Warden sent to everyone this presentation. It is also in the record of the agenda itself. So thank you very much for the details. I have a quick question for you, sir, and then I'll yield the floor to Alderman Huntley, who has another question. So some of these areas have been previously developed already in your, for what you pointed out. Are you aware of any artifacts that have been discovered in those previous developments in the past, or has the Heritage Commission been aware of any of artifacts previously discovered in the past?
No, I'm not aware of any artifacts because no one's been on that site to take a look. There are other developments along missed opportunities, and we don't want to miss this opportunity. Along Forest Drive in 2010, there was an area called the Button Field by the scavengers, the archaeology scavengers of Annapolis. That's where the Safeway is today. There were so many Civil War artifacts on that land that they called it the Button Field. We also lost the opportunity on Hudson Street. With the DPW site there, we put in a request to do some assessment of that property, and in both cases, there was no assessment. We lost those opportunities. So I'm pleading with you to provide this opportunity to save this cultural and heritage site for Annapolis.
Thank you, sir. Alderman Huntley?
Well, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it and appreciate all the work of the Heritage Commission. I have a somewhat fun question first, but one of my favorite parts of your presentation was about the apple. Could you tell us some more about the apples?
He has several hundred acres of, excuse me, not several hundred acres. He had about 80 acres just of apple trees. In those days, you could grow about 12 different varieties of apples in Anne Arundel County. I'm not quite sure how many varieties he made there. Remember, he ran the City Hotel, which was the prominent major hotel of the city of Annapolis, and he had to serve a lot of people their meals, and that's where all this produce is coming from.
Yeah. Thank you. I had to.
You had to bring that
out.
out.
It's fascinating, and really would definitely recommend to my colleagues to take a look at the presentation. My other question, and this could probably go to just about anybody here, is so I'm doing a project in my day job where we're just putting in a drainage water management system in a field. But because it's federal money, it's subject to the National Historic Preservation Act. And so we've got to do an archaeological survey, I think similar to what Mr. Warden's asking for here and the Heritage. Is the federal money that we are the Resilience Authority is looking at getting, would it be subject to those NHPA requirements? Will we have to do something to satisfy NHPA? And then what does that look like? And that's where I looked at the city manager. That might be something in your area of expertise, but I don't know. Anybody who wants to take it.
I'm not familiar, and perhaps Ms.
I don't-
Mateo is.
There's nothing that's come up in any of the brownfield information that would subject us to that. I would also like to state too that I would like to talk to our environmental team about safety for the archaeological assessment, because they are going to be doing excavation work in contaminated conditions. So I would like to go back to our environmental consulting team to really understand what levels of archaeological assessment are safe.
That's
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I did a quick look up, and it appears from my Google AI in the last 30 seconds that the EPA Brownfields grant is subject to that. It's called Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. What Google tells me in this moment. So I would love to hear what those requirements are. I mean, like I said, I understand a little bit about it from my work. I know it's something we're dealing with the city doc, and I'm curious to what extent. Like, first of all, my question is, what do we have to do? How rigorous is that, and to what extent we can conduct that kind of rigorous historic preservation requirement or historic archaeological review, whatever you want to call it, while doing the work, right? The way that we're doing it in city doc. So those are my questions. I understand if you guys don't have an answer to it right now, but that's going to definitely impact how I ultimately vote on this legislation. So any answers you can help me get on that would be helpful.
Do think it's complicated by the fact that it is a contaminated site, so we'll have to look into what those parameters will be and how that impacts the grant. I did reach out to Mr. Tower after the Environmental Matters Committee meeting, and just to see if there had been any archaeological assessment planned for the site or previously performed. He confirmed there has not been any archaeological assessment there. There had not been any planned, but he had watched Mr. Warden's presentation that day and said just from that preliminary information, he thinks that it's warranted, but he would like to discuss it further.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think maybe it'd be generally like we're not doing it so well. Certainly, we're not doing it right at City Resilience Authority, but I know from my understanding is generally it's handled by the state preservation. So it might be worthwhile because we're trying to get this answered to talk with their office. Thank you. Thank you again so much for being here, Mr. Warden.
Thank you, Alderman Hunley. Does anyone else have a question for Mr. Warden while he is here? Seeing none. Mr. Warden, thank you so much for your presentation and your work with the commission, sir. We appreciate you joining us today. If you could leave it here, I have it all, and it is just, again, it is posted on the official record for this legislation going along. Thank you. Do we have, before we move on to general debate on the legislation, do we have anybody else here to testify on this bill? Seeing none. Okay. So before we move on to general debate, I was hoping that Mr. Clements, who would come to testify during public testimony on this, would come. He had shared some concerns about potential safety of brownfield development, which I greatly understand. We do want people to be safe. I hear his concerns. This may not totally assuage them, but I just want to share some of the process that goes into housing redevelopment or office redevelopment on a brownfield site. The two main processes that goes into it are you either completely remove all of the contaminated dirt. This is not only and then replace it with clean dirt for the site itself. This is not only the safest and most thorough way to make a site safe, it also happens to be the cheapest way to do it. So not many ways are both safe and cheap. So turns out builders love this method. And then there is also another way to do this called capping, and that is where you put down a concrete vapor barrier and then bury it with clean dirt. Some sites require both the removal of the contaminated dirt and capping just for extra safety, and it is both a state Maryland Department of the Environment and an EPA requirement for frequent testing, especially if it is a particularly contaminated site, to make sure that there are no vapor leaks, that everybody is kept safe. And so, along with what was mentioned when Alderman Savage mentioned the response action plan, some of the things that come up with that is also a state requirement. Some of the things that come up with that is groundwater use restrictions, groundwater remedies that will be necessary if there are verified impacts, removal of any remnant underground tanks or other contributors to contamination, removal of any contaminated soils that are contributing to ongoing contamination, removal and proper disposal of contamination that is exposed based on construction such as grading, foundation, utilities, and then there's management of buried wastes or contamination that need to stay in place, such as beneath the building, parking lot, or other types of formal cap. So this is a very thorough process. Maryland does have a very high success, very long history of successful brownfield redevelopments. So if Mr. Clemens is listening, or anybody else who shared his concerns on the safety of this site, we hear you. Hopefully this assuages some of them. And I just wanted to address that. That was not me trying to call him out specifically, but I do know that he has been a vocal person who has been concerned on this issue. So hopefully that answers any questions that he may have. And if there are more, please come to us and we will try to assuage as many concerns as we can as possible. So moving on towards general debate on this legislation, because I do want to get this out of committee tonight. Alderman Savage, on one of the points that you had brought up, and I understand your concern greatly on wanting to not pigeonhole ourselves to the use of this site, whether it's for Eastport CNI, developing for housing, or mixed-use development for another developer, or for city office space, or any other way. My understanding is we're shortest on city office space, though. Is that right, or are we short on other types of city for what you are concerned with?
Well, I mean, what I'm concerned with, it was office space, but we just got that other facility. And that's what I think we did include in the last resolution on this. But again, my concern is we're looking at, we have money for 2 transit studies, one for West Street, which is going to be looking at various options. You know, it's going to frankly, focus on looking at a trolley, bringing back a historic trolley, connecting with the county. We have another study looking at Forest Drive. Spa Road, no matter in Forest Drive, as far as be it bus rapid transit, probably not trolley, but something else. Point is, Spa Road is going to be a key transit connector, especially if we end up going a trolley route to have a trolley barn, which you have to have. And so again, I don't know until those studies are done, which again we're working with the Resilience Authority on. We're not going to know exactly what direction to go, but I would hate to tie our hands before we even know exactly what direction we can go with some of the transit improvements, because that used to be a transit hub for the city. That used to be where the buses pulled off until it was moved. It was moved, I think, to Eastport. So again, that's why, again, I don't think it's, ultimately, I don't even think it's needed for housing if we can just relax some of the parking requirements. But so that's my one concern with the zoning.
Would
land use.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Would we potentially have the space for? Because I'm also part of the potential trolley. I love understand the importance of the trolley. I guess I never thought that far ahead, which is why you're leading the group and I'm just a hanger on. Would we have enough space for that as the potential? Would we have enough space for that near the current public works site as a potential alternative? Because I think if we can turn this into either office space or retail space or housing of some kind, I think since this is closer to the center of the city itself, that might get better ridership on the systems as well, versus storage for the barns might be better on more of the outskirts portion of the city, like where we have the current public works site itself. I do hear what you need, though. We do need to find good space for storing that. But where I was going with that is I share the sentiments of my colleague, Alderman Arnett, where to do a lot of the stuff, we do just need to do the remediation anyway, especially if we have this converted into city offices or into general housing with CNI or into another developer, whatever we end up planning on doing with it. Some pretty substantial remediation does need to be done. So essentially, unless we purely know we want to keep this for industrial, remediation needs to be done. And even if hypothetically we do end up keeping it at industrial use, like for a trolley barn or for any other potential transit hub use, I don't think there's going to be a lot lost if we have this grant to do some remediation, because we could be getting rid of some pretty significant contaminants that, let's say there's a massive storm and that causes a contaminant runoff into Spa Creek or some other type of catastrophe. Now, I think that's unlikely, but we're getting more and more frequent storms, and I could potentially see something like a big hurricane coming and that causes that sort of runoff. So
Yeah.
I understand wanting to keep our options open. I don't think this grant pigeonholes us in a way that would prevent what you want to see happen with your goals for a good transportation. I hope I addressed some of your worries with that, but do you have any additional thoughts on the legislation itself before I open it up to our guests here today?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think what it comes down to is just the speed. I mean, of this happening. It's happening very quickly, and we don't have answers to a lot. Just like my colleague from Ward 1, and as an environmental scientist, entirely supportive of remediation. It needs to get done. But I'm also, since I've been on the council a while, wary of, I've seen the council rush things through and it ends up biting us. This feels very, very, very rushed to me. A lot of unknowns. I mean, reading the report, the phase 2 assessment, just the last 2 sentences in their conclusion, it says a response action plan should be developed to address the identified concerns and protect human health and the environment through future development stages. In addition, a screening level ecological risk assessment, SLERA, should be prepared to evaluate potential ecological receptors in Spa Creek that may be exposed to site-related constituents. These are 2 reports that are being recommended coming out of our phase 2 environmental assessment. So yeah, I would feel a lot more comfortable if we had these reports completed, so we know exactly what the implications of any kind of, what needs to be done through remediation, what are the implications on any kind of future development. And I'm also still wrestling with how much of this information are we going to have to provide with the grant application, and so I'm trying to think about ways to keep this moving forward. Some things I can come up with would be, it seems like we really need, because again, part of this hinges on the proposed development plan, right? So if we could get something attached to this, or if we need a separate work session, I know we've had a couple open up, how do we at least somewhat solidify, firm up a proposed development plan so that you know what you're going to be submitting with the grant application, and so the consultant knows when they do the RAP and this other document what to look at as far as remediation costs and techniques. But how do we get that firmed up development plan? Can we just get some kind of attached aerial that essentially says everything to the west is going to, I don't know even how to frame it, but keep it in a city-related use, and then on the east it's going to be potentially so lot 1 potentially for housing associated with the CNI, mixed use. because it seems like that's really one of the big unknowns that is at least giving me a lot of consternation. But again, that also is really we're going to be needing, I think, as you said, to determine final costs. So presumably some kind of assumptions are going to be made in that application, the grant application. So if you understand what I'm getting at, like what can we get attached to this that kind of more or less solidifies some of the development proposals?
I mean, I do believe, and I think she might have shared them at Rules on Friday, that Melissa Evan-Medix does have some initial preliminary concept documents. And I believe she may have shared them, or if not, we could ask her to share them. Again, keeping in mind, they're preliminary and their concept, but it would at least, I do think there's a general sketch of what she's thinking of. I do think she has a couple alternatives because she is planning for the possibility that she might not be able to use these sites. So she's already planning, I think, 3 or 4 steps out with different plans. But I think she does have something that she is able to share, and I can check with her.
Okay. Well, I mean, but that also speaks to my point. It puts HACA in the driver's seat of this entirely. Given our history with HACA, I don't support that at all. I'm very concerned about that, right? Because you're saying, well, HACA has a plan. Well, does that include both sides of the site? And so if we do give them approval to do the CNI on both sides, we're going to have to go back to HACA to negotiate. Oh, how can we use some of this site for a city facility? I mean, it's not directed at you. I'm just saying that's frustrating.
No, I think when we do this, if and when we do the CNI application, we will have to have a more progressed plan. But again, it will have to be flexible debate on the remediation, but that will be when we go into that grant application, we will, because we're going to be the co-applicant, we would have some say in what the final plan is moving forward at that time. We also don't have to agree to that. That is the idea being considered right now, is sort of a joint partnership, because HACA would be bringing in a private developer to assist. So they would be funding and paying for the private developer, which we in the city, in theory, would not have to contribute as heavily to. But again, that's just a concept plan. And HACA has already acknowledged on Friday with Rules that if the city is not comfortable with HACA using this property, will pivot to a different alternative.
Well, also, if you mind, have a quick response to your concern. Also, as part of the subdivision process, if we subdivide, we don't have to sell the entire portion to HACA. That's one of the potential benefits of subdivision. Is that correct, Mr. Leonard?
Yes. So having eventually four parcels when we get this all subdivided will allow some flexibility about which parcels go where and get used. Right now, you have parcel 358 and 859 all tied together. So you essentially only have with the state, you only really have 2 parcels. You have 62 by itself, and then the other 3 are all combined. So by subdividing, you're going to break this into 4 pieces that you can pivot and move around differently, in theory.
Well, so just to wrap up my part of it, I guess that helps to know. So what I'll say is, I guess, in 6 months, and again, it's the timeline on this that gives me concern, because in 6 months, we could probably get the RIP completed. We could probably get that other environmental document completed. We could probably get the feasibility study completed for the West Street trolley, as far as location of trolley barn, in 6 months. And that's why, but we just there's so much information that we don't have. So is that really firm? This money is gonna, this grant's not renewing in November. The money's gone.
Nothing is.
For the brownfields, this will be the last year with this amount of money, and it will be the last opportunity to not have to match. This grant doesn't require a match. In the future, the grant's going to require a match.
Alderman Savage, just on the RAP, I know you seem to be a little stuck on the RAP. you don't have to have the remedial action plan. You don't have to have that completed before applying for the grant application. I believe under this brownfield program, and you are closer to it, Ms. Mateo, than I am, that part of the funding is to develop the RAP.
Well, what's the engineer's estimate included in the proposal for the grant? Because somebody's going to have to estimate the cost for the remediation. How is that being determined, and what is that amount?
So currently, we're asking the CNI team to provide us with their feasibility, and they're going to give us a preliminary cost, and then our environmental team is going to do a preliminary risk plan for remediation and provide that cost. So it will be based on an actual development.
And that's sufficient. That is, as long as there's sufficient characterization of the site and the contaminants there, that's sufficient for this type of grant application, what their environmental consultants are doing.
But is that, is that based on, I don't even know, we're talking about it. This is so intricately connected with the CNI, yet I have no idea what they're proposing. So are they proposing to do the entire, all 4 parcels as residential mixed use?
Well, not all 4 parcels, because we're keeping lot 2. So lot 2 is not part of the deal.
Right, sorry.
Yeah. So of the other 3 parcels, I believe, and you might want to watch the rules meeting on Friday. Melissa did provide sort of a 15-minute summary of what her vision is.
Okay.
So if you want to hear it straight from her, I would go watch that section of the rules meeting. But to summarize, I believe that the concept is to include, she explained it completely, but it was city offices, HACA offices potentially, parking, underground parking. I believe she said there was going to be some sort of outdoor features and then residential as well. So it was going to be a mix. But if you want to, I'm not explaining it super well. If you want to watch that portion of the Friday's rules meeting, Melissa goes through all of that and in detail about including how many proposed spots and parking spots and how many units and all. She gets into all the numbers.
Okay. Yeah, I'll take a look. And that's I've said this before, but my other big concern is just and related to the CNI, it's a development of the past as far as the design. It's not based on new urbanism. These things we're all trying to work towards. We're giving this big green light to this completely asphalt-filled development proposal. Makes 0 sense. And especially now we're talking about maybe throwing a wrench in any kind of plans we have to do new urbanism with new transit. So at this point, I'm not going to block it, but I don't feel comfortable taking any action personally at this point.
Alderman Arnett has been waiting patiently.
Thank you. So, Alderman Savage, I share your frustration that we're getting such an open-ended piece of legislation at the last minute with absolutely no background. The Rules Committee really helped me a lot, and particularly hearing from on the CNI program. I also share your angst because I also want trolleys and I also want housing. We can do anything, but we can't do everything. In this site, I think, in keeping with the comp plan, is not just housing and office space. We need, it will be a food desert, so we need to think about having groceries and daycare and all the other things that we want to do in the comp plan. And I think this is the best site to accomplish that, assuming we can get the remediation done. So, and as we go on and we get more briefings, I personally am getting more comfortable with the concept moving forward. And again, I just would repeat what Director Vogel said. We can't do anything here until we do the remediation. We can't finish any plans. We can't even enter into any specific negotiations with CNI or any other development there without doing the remediation. So it's almost like we've got to pull the trigger someplace to get this going. And I think this is the vehicle that does that.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Huntley, do you have any final thoughts?
I thought Alderman Arnett summed it up perfectly the way I see it. I hear what Alderman Savage is saying about we could go back and forth till we're blue in the face about how we want the CNI project to work. But to me, this is about let's do the remediation. Let's do it now.
Okay. I'm going to share one final thought, and then before we figure out how to take an action, what kind to move it on. I agree and understand your frustration of not a lot of info. We are reacting. Part of that is due to the changes in the federal winds and trying to get this bit of money and chasing an ever-shrinking and temperamental national movement. But sometimes we get to strategize. Sometimes we have to improvise. This is unfortunately in an improvisational situation. Having a background in improv, I don't mind it as much, but
Not funny.
a little funny. Thank you. But I understand why others may not be as comfortable with that. So while I am personally okay making a recommendation, I feel like you do not share that same degree of comfort. So can I get a recommendation, motion for no action?
I'll move that the committee has decided not to take any action on
2025.
2025.
I shall second. All in favor? Aye. All right. Thank you all so much for joining us today. This was a very long but very detailed deep dive into this legislation. Normally, Economic Matters is quick and speedy, but let it never be said I rushed through bills that need deep dives. So thank you all for joining us. You can stay if you want, but if you don't want to, you can also go home. All right. So up next on the agenda, we have 01925 regulation of tours in historic Annapolis. I understand we have quite a few people here to testify on the legislation today. So what I am going to do first is give the floor to Alderman Huntley, the legislation sponsor, to let him introduce the legislation. I will then open up the floor to those who wish to testify for their 3 minutes, where committee members can ask questions to those who wish to be asked. And then we will hear out any debates or potential amendments. So, Alderman Huntley.
Thanks so much. So, the way I feel about this bill is that we have for a long time had a very tight-knit community of tour operators. They've sort of taken care of themselves. And as we came to a situation where that was no longer the case, it's become necessary for some level of government involvement. That was the genesis of the bill. We felt like I'll speak for myself, like we had kind of covered the folks who we knew were the major players when it came to tours, thought we had sort of made sure that everybody was in support of this, that everybody recognized how this would be beneficial to their businesses. But what we heard on Monday night is that, like with so many things, has disparate impacts on larger. I don't think we're really talking about any of our local tour operators being large businesses, but larger businesses compared to small businesses. So I think we've got a great bill here in a lot of ways. You can see one amendment in front of you, which is really just a correction. At a previous stage, we had a requirement to have a local address, and we decided to take that out. So this is just doing that. I think there's really two issues still on the table to me. One, I hope you all will see as favorably. I'd like to bring forward an additional amendment that specifies in code the amount of insurance required, rather than leaving that up to planning and zoning. That's not in front of you, but I think it's just a good practice. And then the second one, which is much more of a bigger deal, is how do we make sure this is not overly burdensome to the kinds of guys who it's just one person doing tours. Maybe they hire somebody to take care of it when they're out of town. And that's what I'm hoping we can have a discussion about today. I have some ideas myself on what kind of an amendment would take care of that, but really wanted to hear from all of you and work this out as a collaborative process in committee, come up with what we want to see out of an amendment going out of this. Then Ms. Reuter can help us draft. So that's my intro. I think, I'm not sure how many of the folks who are here are for this, but I know at least a couple of them are. So I think maybe rather than have them come say what they said on Monday, we want to target their testimony to this fundamental question that I'm trying to get at of how do we make sure this is not overly burdensome on the small operators. But actually, maybe, Mr. Chair, if you'll allow Mr. Carter could come up and speak, because he was he's been helping me with this from the beginning.
Certainly, if please come and join us. And I feel like a couple of the tour guides, you all came together and coordinated. Is that a correct understanding? Or all right, so since you guys came together, the two of you can join us at the panel table. Your testimony will still be 3 minutes, but we may have some back and forth questions for each of you.
Are you here for I think we got a third also. Are you here for this?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So we'll still open it up after this for you to testify as well. Thank you for joining us on this legislation. We really want to hear from you. We want to create a really good bill here that takes care of everybody and has a good even playing field for folks. So, as I said, 3-minute testimony. Ms. Jackson? So please state your name and address, 3 minutes, and then the gavel.
And Michael Bors.
If you could please turn the mics on with the little green light.
It's not, oh, no, it's not.
Not fully.
Sorry. Mike Carter, 13 Francis Street. Sorry.
And Michael Bors, 987 Round Top Drive.
All right. Do you have any testimony prepared? Or just standing on what was said on Monday night for public testimony?
I think the only thing I'd like to say is just I feel that this legislation is helpful to local tourism and local tour operators, and that it levels the playing field, has us all following the same rules, all obeying the laws, and doing what's best for the city, and also helping our businesses grow. It's my opinion that it's pretty straightforward. 3 simple requirements: legally registered business in good standing, carrying insurance, and agreeing to operate under your legal name. And can't just haphazardly change your name. You have to go by what your legal name is. That's pretty much what the legislation spells out. I'm full support of that. I don't see a whole lot of problems myself, but I guess that's up to everybody to decide.
And my contribution to that, the qualification that I made on Monday night, is just that there are a few small kind of individual and maybe 1 or 2 outfits here in the city, including William with Colonial Tours of Annapolis, myself with Tour Annapolis. And we are looking for an exemption for those who are right at the bottom rung, trying to get started in this business, with exemptions maybe to some of these requirements for those starting out.
Which types of requirements listed were you smaller guys hoping to get exemptions from?
One would be the licensing fee, and the second would be potentially on the insurance if for your status with it as a small business.
And I apologize. If you could please repeat your name and address for the record for Ms. Jackson.
Michael Bors, 987 Round Top Drive, Annapolis.
So the insurance and what other issue were you hoping?
The licensing fee.
The licensing fee. So that does open up some potential liability risks, but we can debate that later amongst ourselves. As far as the insurance goes, the licensing fees.
Can I
That's
add
a question for
one note to that? The other discussion with respect to insurance was it was my proposal to clarify the limit of liability because of course the rate that that a business will have to pay for insurance is dependent on the limit of liability that's required by the city. And so while larger, or I guess I should say medium tour groups might have larger limits of liability, if you do decide to go forward with an insurance requirement for everyone, then making sure that for the small guys, it's a small limit of liability and therefore a small cost annually. That would be the kind of second request here.
Okay, so a sliding scale, not necessarily an exemption, is
Right. Either of those would be helpful.
Okay, that is much more understandable. So that's kind of all of the questions that I have in regards to this legislation for you all. I'm going to open the floor to Alderman Savage and then my other colleagues on the committee. Alderman Savage, do you have any questions for this panel right here?
Well, I mean, so I'm hearing that potential cost of, I think, the insurance and licensing might be impactful to the smaller businesses. What kind? I don't know how much is paid through insurance. I mean, presumably any business that's over a certain number of employees is going to have that anyway, right? I mean, I don't know.
And at least two of the tour operators in the city, myself and William, who spoke on Monday, we don't have employees. It's just ourselves doing this as a small side business,
Okay.
part-time business. And so
Okay.
that's where the insurance burden would be felt a bit heavier.
Okay.
May I briefly, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
So one other concern that I've heard, and I feel like it's actually mostly covered without an amendment, but it's all the more reason for amendment, is that this legislation, obviously it only applies to walking tours. It also only applies to what we call commercial tour operators, which, even though it's just you're taking money for the tours, but there are also people who give tours for free, and we definitely don't want it to apply to them. So I think the legislation as it's written it doesn't include them, but like I said, all the more reason to say if you're just a guy giving tours, then you don't need to get licensed.
So, are you working on amendments to this?
Well, my intention was to hash out exactly what that amendment should look like tonight with you guys, and then come up with the text of it.
Well, I mean, I guess if you get some kind of language that exempts, I'd say businesses that are, I don't know, 3 or less, something like that, some low threshold of
Funny you say that.
number of employees, and then saying, because we don't, what do we specify in legislation for liability? Do we set a dollar amount or
We do not.
So it really just comes down to, maybe it just comes down to businesses that have one employee.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm going to be honest. I personally do not like the idea of a total exemption. A sliding scale, I think, is more than reasonable, because I'm assuming a small tour company is not going to be giving massive tours all by their lonesome. But a total exemption, I feel like, opens up an issue. It opens up some potential issues that may be being a worrywart, but I get. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I guess that's very understandable. I guess I would point for your consideration to the fact that there have been independent tour guides, small tour guides operating in this city for decades, including William himself for more than 20 years. So there does seem to be a history of it working out at the very small scale in that way.
I suppose my fear is it could potentially blow back on the city. Ms. Leonard, is that unfounded fear on my part?
So you want the insurance? I mean, you could accomplish the same thing with sort of an indemnification. Because having someone carrying insurance, in order for them to carry insurance, for us to have sort of active rights on it, we would have to be not only a certificate holder on the policy, but we'd also have to be an additional insured. In order to, if a claim happens and we're involved, we'd have to be an additional insured and to be able to pull down. And that's still subject to whatever exclusions would be the insurance policy, and ultimately what the insurance, decide. Because, the insurance company is the one that makes the ultimate determination about the claim. Sometimes, instead of doing insurance, especially for smaller ones, we require an indemnification provision, which basically means if you caused an issue and we get sued, you are the responsible party for purpose of it, and you step into our shoes.
And would that be part of business license procedure?
We do have it on various things. So, like the sidewalk signs, which we require a bond for, also includes indemnification language, I believe, off the top of my head. Special events are required to do indemnification. Sometimes special events do insurance, and sometimes the insurance is waived. So there are instances in which we don't require insurance depending on certain scenarios.
Some instances, but most we do.
It depends. So like special
You're
events.
not giving me hard rules.
Yeah, special events is a good one because there's actually code language in there about how they can request an insurance waiver that has set guidelines in it. So if a special event, the default is they do have to provide insurance. They can request a waiver, and the waiver has to meet certain requirements in order for the insurance requirement to be waived.
Okay.
So that's the process they've sort of set out. One of them, I haven't looked at it recently, but I think there's like 3 or 4 criteria, and it's in the city code. And only if they meet the criteria can they hold their special event and get a special event permit without providing insurance. However, they are still required to indemnify us. So that we never give up that piece.
My concerns have not been waived based upon those answers. Too much flexibility. Don't like that. So, Alderman Huntley, you had your hand up. I believe you have a couple other.
So, okay, it sounds like you're worried about the insurance part.
I just don't want any blowback on the city.
Yeah, sure. Let me put a pin in that for 1 second and say, right now, if you guys are looking at the legislation, page 2, section 14 line 14 describes who has to do this. So it's any person, firm, or corporation that does business as a commercial tour operator by providing a tour guide or originating tours within city limits. So we could simply add in there, must obtain a license. That's the most important part. We could add in there with more than 2 employees, and I'm going to use the word employees, but I think we would actually use language to make sure it's inclusive of contractors who are acting as tour guides, but I'm going to just say employees for now. So we could simply add in language there that says, that does business as a commercial tour operator with more than 2 employees. Now, that would not address your insurance. Frankly, I feel like I would be fine with that. We've had people doing it for a while. But what we could then do is that because the insurance required section is actually a separate section from the licensing section, we could essentially still put in code that those folks are required to have insurance, but not check it. Like not because they would not have to go through the process of getting a business license or a walking tour operator license, they would not have that requirement that they submit that certificate of insurance. Yeah, that's how we could do it.
Yeah, so we're not gonna be able to, I think, craft all this tonight. But let me just give you some ideas, like some other things I think we need to look at. Perhaps giving a definition for local small operator, right? So we'll have a definition for, I guess, tour operator, then local small operator, and then you could define it. We want to have like a tiered or reduced business license fees depending on if they're standard tour operator or the local small operator license. And since I bring that up, we do need an associated fee resolution, right? We worked on with this. The other thing would be if we want to have scaled insurance requirements, but also compliance, a compliance window, like or accelerated. Do we want like a fast track processing for the local small operators, but also extend the compliance window as far as giving perhaps some of these smaller operators time, 180 days because if we are talking about having them to meet some additional licensing requirements, it might be good to give them some time.
May I respond?
So I'm going to agree with Alderman Savage's assessment here on giving you a little time to kind of craft this potential amendment. I have a personal dislike of coming up with complicated amendments on the floor in committee.
Oh, I'm not
but-
asking anybody to vote
okay.
on the amendment tonight, to be
Okay.
clear. I wanted us to workshop it.
That I don't mind. But yeah, coming up with a potential one on those scales, we'll let you come up with the language and submit what specifically you want. You may also want to specify, I think this one might be easy, just making sure that you stress this applies to for-profit institutions or whatever you want to stress to ensure that it goes to commercial and not tourists for free. I don't know if you want nonprofit tours that charge a fee to have it apply to them or whatever, but you seem to have a very specific type of thing you wouldn't mind to have this rule and regulation apply to it. A potential concern that was brought forward, Amendment 1 addresses the issues of a local business license, and we did have another individual come forward with two individuals come forward with this as a potential issue. So Amendment 1 does address that concern, but another potential issue that came forward was the suspension issue. There was a belief that it could lead to hold on, let me pull this up here. Enforcement without due process. The ordinance enables a city to revoke a license immediately upon violation, even for unintentional or guest-related actions. So, do you have a response to that? I know some people just send in potential issues, but this does seem like it could be a problem. Like, is there, in your mind, a way that enforcement issues get brought on? Is suspension something that we jump to first thing, or is this suspension something for repeat violations? Do you think this needs to be clarified in the legislation itself?
I think I had the city attorney address this. Let me just find it. Let's see. He says it gives the director administrative discretion to enforce compliance in a way that is protective of the historic district, yet allows the operator some freedom to do business, and provides appeal rights if the director were to overreach or be in error. So the city attorney felt like that concern was addressed.
Okay. Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Arnett, do you have any? Hey, man. I'm going to give the floor to Alderman Savage, Ms. Leonard, and then I'm going to open up for any other potential testimony, and then we can debate the amendments and debate the legislation as a whole if we want to take action, postpone, or what we wish to do.
So one other thing, the staff report did mention potential staffing impact, plan and zoning, as far as initially getting this set up and rolled out. I think a alternative may be that plan and zoning look at utilizing some of their contractual money to hire some consultant to help with getting this off the ground. We can certainly look to see if there's any other remaining funds or one-time use money that can go towards that effort. But related to that, on page 4, line 17, this has failure to go. Is that the right reference? I think I wrote down the wrong one. Oh, appeals on line 18. So suspension and citations, it would have appeals going to the director. So I am a little wary having appeals go to the director unless we absolutely need to. Is there any other board that we could send these to that might be appropriate? I mean, I was thinking not quite building, but maybe this is a question for law office. Is there anything else you could think of as far as a board that maybe? I know the building board of appeals is probably, zoning board of appeals probably already has enough on their plate.
The building board of appeals does hear appeals on this.
Oh, they do. Okay. Oh, well, so do we need to change this then to specify that it's the building board of appeals and not the director?
Is it multi-layers of appeals?
So
Usually it goes to the director first. The director weighs in and makes the decision, and then depending on what the director says, it can be appealed up.
correct. So
It's the usual pathway.
the director hearing, and
Oh, I
then
see.
you can appeal
Yeah.
the director's decision to the building board of appeals, and then you can appeal that to the circuit court.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Leonard, you had your hand up. Did you have any other?
I was just going to make a recommendation to Alderman Huntley. If you're trying to do a sliding scale, you might want to consider how the state of Maryland treats different business entities. They have different requirements for like a sole proprietorship versus like a full-blown corporation, both in terms of registering, licensing, what insurance is required. So you might be able to piggyback off of sort of the state sliding scale of how they treat different business.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that could be helpful.
All right. So I'm going to open the gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us today. No further questions for you here at the table. I understand we have a couple other folks here, at least one other here to testify on this legislation. Would you like to join us up at the podium? Oh, sure. Thank you. As stated, 3 minutes to testify. Please give your name and address for the record.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Charles, Missouri. I'm at 215 West Street.
I'm sorry. Is the...
There we go.
Okay.
Charles Mazurek at 215 West Street. And I'm one of the small tour operators. And occasionally I'll run a tour for friends for free. Occasionally I'll like charge people. It's just kind of off and on. So when I saw the legislation, I was worried that, I'd be caught up in all this bureaucracy and basically not be able to do that. Which, I've been running tours for probably over 15 years here and there. So I just was worried about, I also submitted online testimony, so it might have been already recorded. But I wanted to make sure that, the competition, for the small people trying to get started, that there's not a whole bunch of hurdles that you have to jump through to be able to do a tour in town. I think it's important to have healthy competition. Even if you just start out as small, you could grow larger, but just to have that opportunity. So,
Thank you, sir.
okay.
Now, I have a quick question for you. In your online testimony, the big complaint that you had brought forward was local business address. We do have an amendment here that does remove that concern. Did you have another specific concern on the legislation? Because again, we want to try and we don't want to overburden local small businesses and tours such as yourself. Do you have another concern that we should be aware of? Because we don't want to get the little guys caught up a big dragnet here.
Yeah, I guess as far as that, the insurance would be a big issue, just paying for that. And I heard different things like indemnification and sliding scale and all that stuff. So some of that might be able to be worked out. But being made to, if you're only given a few tours every once in a while, having to just pay for insurance and all the other stuff that a bigger company would do would definitely limit my opportunities. And then also the portion about, touching historic buildings, that seemed a little bit excessive to me. As far as, how that seems like something that, a private property owner would be concerned with, not necessarily the city. So I wasn't sure exactly if I was reading that right, or if there's more behind that I don't know.
Hey, perfect timing.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much, sir, for your testimony today. We appreciate you staying here for a very in-depth meeting, and thank you for coming in. Does anyone else have questions or comments for this, Alderman Huntley?
Yeah. So, Mr. Misek, we
Yeah.
corresponded briefly online, but I just want to make sure I remember correctly. If we are trying to exempt the small operators, what do you think for your business would be the best way to define that?
I would say by employee or contractors. That's probably like the easiest way to do it, to separate the bigger companies from the small guys.
Okay.
I think that's a reasonable thing, because if you're doing, if you have employees or contractors, you're in definitely a different scaler.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
That's what I need to know. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Ms. Leonard?
Legally speaking, they'd be considered sole proprietorships generally.
And I was talking with somebody earlier today. I'm sorry, you mind if I?
Please.
I was talking with somebody earlier today who generally does all their own, but also might, if they're out of town, hire somebody to take care of it for them. Can that still be a sole proprietorship if they, in that scenario?
It depends how often they do it. Generally speaking, sole proprietorships are sort of like a standalone ship, but that doesn't completely limit their ability to hire out in certain limited circumstances. But I think if you don't want to do like a pure sole proprietorship, which is essentially what all these gentlemen sound like they are anyway, you could just limit it that they only have, temporary employees or no employees. It's just the state of Maryland does already have these categories, and for a sole proprietorship, they don't require anywhere near the amount of paperwork or registration or all the safety nets that they do require for bigger companies, because there's less risk involved with it.
Got it. So sounds to me like and maybe I'm jumping ahead to discussion here, but sounds to me like the sort of sense of the committee is definitely to say, whether it's defined by sole proprietorship or number of employees, we want to exempt them from, at the very least, the fees for getting the license, and then maybe getting the license itself. But generally, sounds like at least you guys do not want to do that for insurance. I kind of do, but that's my sense of where things stand.
I will not speak for my colleagues, but I personally am more of a stickler for insurance than I am for fees and licensure. Alderman Savage, what are your thoughts?
I'm open to reducing or eliminating the requirement. More friendly towards reducing the requirement for insurance. But again, I think it depends on the type of business they are and how many employees.
I am very open to reducing and sliding scale on insurance. I do want to state that. I think that is a fantastic idea, very reasonable.
The only reason I would argue against the sliding scale is I think it might be more complicated than we need it to be. My suggestion for the insurance requirement is to set it equal to the insurance requirement that the Naval Academy has for giving tours on their campus, which is, they make it a little more complicated, but it's essentially $1 million. So that's what and I think that's, from talking with some of these folks, not horribly overburdensome. My preference, I think, would be to just completely exempt them. But I'd say rather than a sliding scale, $1 million that's a pretty standard liability insurance policy.
Okay. All right. Do we have any other folks who wish to testify? Seeing none. All right. So, Alderman Huntley, seems like you want to put in at least one or two other amendments to this legislation. Do you want us to debate this and move it forward while you work on those amendments, knowing that we're under a bit of a timeline for you to get those in, but also timeline to get this passed? I never like economic matters being a holdup, but I also don't want to put you in a weird position where you're scrambling to get your bill in the position you want to have it.
I feel like we want a forward amendments recommendation, but we don't have the amendments quite yet.
I mean, we can get it out of committee while you work on it. It's up to you, bud.
Yeah, I think moving it forward. I think I have understood what I need to understand here, and you guys can get it out of the committee whether you want to take a favorable or unfavorable. Or I don't know exactly what kind of recommendation you would make. If it was me, I would just call it a favorable with amendments recommendation. But yes, I think moving it out of economic matters. I don't think we need to keep debating it here, and then we can have the amendments ready by the time it's on the floor.
All right, cool. Let's debate Amendment 1 then. All right, can I get a motion to debate Amendment 1?
I'll move this favorably.
I will second. For folks' reference, Amendment 1 removes the local company address of business. I think this is a pretty reasonable request, and it matches most folks' concern, or folks who had concerns with the bill. It is matches it. And all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. All those in favor of a positive, all those, can I get a motion for a favorable with amendments for 01925?
Well, let's see if you like this wording. Because I also, with everything, with our timeline being what it is, I don't want to hold this up either. But let me say, what if I make if we have I'm trying to think how to word it. If we have the committee submit a recommendation for amendments to this legislation that address the small business insurance and licensing requirements to scale those or make them, let's just say, to make those more appropriate for the
Jackson, are we, as a point of order, able to, along with our recommendation is favorable with amendments, recommend additional actions? I've never seen that done in a committee, but I don't see why we can't.
Well, I don't think it technically, I guess it wouldn't necessarily be a favorable. It would just be a recommendation that we wouldn't take an opinion, except we recommend that it gets amended to address some of these concerns we have.
Okay.
That makes sense.
I think that's fine. So I guess what would the...
You're not happy with me now.
So I suppose the point after, look, the point is the sponsor knows what we want out of him. He knows what he wants to do with the legislation. I guess for purposes of getting it out of the committee, we would make a motion for no action.
With recommendations.
Recommendations for amendments.
Yeah.
So can I get a motion for no action with recommendations for amendments?
So moved.
I shall second. All in favor? Aye. All righty. Up next, 01725, limiting short-term rentals per block face. Alderman Huntley.
Oh, all right. Moving on. Well, this one I feel like we heard also a lot about on Monday. First of all, thanks so much for being here, guys. Really appreciate you all.
Yep. Thank you all for joining us.
On the short-term rentals per block face, look, I think we can hear, let me just say, I as an alderman hear plenty of complaints about short-term rentals. I hear things about noise. I hear things about parties or smoking or not bringing around trash cans or not cleaning the grass or whatever. I hear all sorts of things. This is not trying to address every problem with short-term rentals. This is trying to address one very specific problem, which we have almost exclusively in my ward, but a little bit in Alderman Arnett's ward, a little bit in Alderwoman O'Neill's ward, of blocks that were community now becoming nothing but short-term rentals or overwhelmingly short-term rentals. I have heard so many different poignant phrases about this. The other day, somebody told me they feel like the sound of children's laughter in their neighborhood has been replaced with roller bags. Somebody else said to me, my kids, when I'm not home, don't know where they can go to if there's an emergency because there's nobody else on the block. It's almost all short-term rentals. This is a really significant problem in Annapolis. And not, truth be told, not everywhere. But this specific problem is short-term rentals can be part of our community, but they can't be all of our community, or we won't have a community. And so this is just trying to address that very particular issue. We spent months and months and months, thanks to Ms. Reuter's diligent research, looking at places where they had tried to address, again, this very specific issue. Certainly, this is not about housing affordability that as we heard from Mr. Gross on Monday. This is about this particular problem. So we ultimately found a model in New Orleans, and we modified it significantly, mostly around making sure that it was legally sufficient. And what this legislation does, sorry for the long preamble, what this legislation does is simply say that when a block hits 10% of dwelling units being short-term rentals, no new licenses are issued. No more. I think it's an incredibly reasonable solution. It does not affect existing short-term rentals, other than that if they were to be sold or lose their license, they would, and they're on a block that's over 10%, they wouldn't be able to get a new one. But this is a very contentious issue, and this is a really important change that we here can make to solve a problem that our residents have. Thanks.
Thank you, Alderman. I really have no questions on the legislation as a whole. I do think this strikes a pretty decent balance and helps, one, respect the existing licenses that we have granted while preventing an additional proliferation on neighborhoods that have had more short-term rentals come in than many folks may be comfortable with. Alderman Savage, you've put forward several amendments on this, but do you have any questions or commentary on the legislation as currently written?
I commend you for introducing this. I thought about taking this approach years ago after I read the bed and breakfast code that does something very similar as far as limitation per block face. So yeah, I definitely like that. I think we need to have a cap. I think we should clarify more as far as why we need it. But my only concern, so to speak, is that it doesn't get us to the 10%.
What? Get what?
It doesn't get us to that 10% cap. So some communities are going to have whatever, you probably know better than I, some of them may have 20%, 25%. This just prevents basically future new licenses, right? They're going to get renewals. So this doesn't get us there. I have an amendment I'll bring up later on that I put together to try to address that. But I want to emphasize that's in my view in support of the underlying effort and not in opposition to it. But yeah, I think this is certainly the direction we need to go, but I just want to give it some more teeth so we can actually get to that goal.
Alderman Arnett, do you have questions or commentary on the legislation as written?
Just one comment. I recently asked the planning department for an update on short-term rentals, and I think there's at least twice as many short-term rentals as are permitted. And I know that to be the case in my ward because I know where they are, and I know that many of them are not registered. And that brings up the enforcement issues and those sorts of things. I support short-term rentals in principle, but I do think that they are a big factor in increasing the cost of housing. And I think that while they provide a service, they also operate contrary to the notions of having more affordable housing. So I support this legislation. I think there may be some constitutional questions. We heard one of the people testifying Monday night bring that up. We'll just have to see. But I think we need to get some reasonable balance for the number of these units. And this is a good shot at trying to do that.
All right. We have several amendments brought forward by Alderman Savage. I move to hear Amendment 1? All right.
I will
Alderman
second that.
Savage.
Let's see. So, Amendment 1 simply redefines block face because my concern was that the definition would exclude a number of neighborhoods that don't have traditional block faces. Just as an example, my community, which is a loop with only one intersecting road outside the community. So this definition came from planning and zoning, I believe, or maybe it was the law office. I don't recall, but I was not the one who drafted it. But this is what was developed by staff to help define block face, and so it does take the original definition, but creates a B that allows planning and zoning to make a determination about what might be considered a block that might not fall in that original definition.
I think that makes sense in a lot more of our squiggly street areas.
Yeah.
Alderman Huntley, do you have any commentary?
I think the intent of this makes a lot of sense. I wonder if maybe we need a little bit more definition in it, or like what's the regular features, and also if someone disagrees with the determination of the planning and zoning director, to what extent would they be able to appeal that? But I mean, I'm definitely more for it than I am against it. I just think there might be some opportunities to make it a little bit stronger.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm certainly open if the law office has anything they'd like to add to this. But I believe under this chapter, the public can appeal basically any decision of the director.
Yeah, I believe under, I'd have to double check because I'm not often in this particular section of the city code, but I believe all of these do have a set appeal process that goes to the director up to one of the other boards, depending on where they fall, and then up to court after that. But I can double check if you want. But like I said, most of these types of issues already have sort of a very built-in, established appeal procedure at this point.
Okay, great.
Alderman Arnett? All right. I'm willing to give this a favorable recommendation. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor of favorable recommendation for Amendment 1? Aye. Move Amendment 2.
So moved.
Second.
So this one basically exempts non-owner occupied. I'm sorry, exempts owner occupied short-term rentals. And again, my rationale for that is that, I think, at least for me, one of my intentions for limiting non-owner occupied is that it ends up taking an entire house off the housing market for long-term rental, but it also impacts the neighborhood, in my view, when you have just too many tourists and visitors replacing what I think should be residents contributing to the community fabric. And so an owner-occupied, which is where Airbnb started, is somebody just renting their spare room, whatever, out on the weekend. And I think that's legitimate because you still have a long-term resident there.
I was going to say.
Oh, okay.
Voting against this just for that. I have no commentary on it. I think this makes a lot of sense. I don't know if colleagues have commentary on this. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I really support the intent here. I think another reason for it is somebody pointed out to me that if we don't exclude owner occupied from the sort of denominator, or sorry, from the numerator of that block face definition, then everybody could just go out and get them and block short-term rentals on their street. And that's really not the intention of the legislation either. So just all the more reason to do it. But I was wondering, when I looked, I didn't see a definition of owner occupied in city code. And so I worry about the ambiguity of this a little bit. I think you just sort of gave the description of it, but we use owner occupied in code, but I haven't seen a definition.
Question, I guess, for Ms. Leonard or Ms. Reuter. Would we have to define for legal sufficiency what that would mean in this amendment then, or at another point in the code itself to make this have legal staying power, or can we keep it as is?
That's what I'm looking at right now.
I don't think so.
To Google.
I don't think doing a quick search, I don't think we have it defined. However, I don't know if it's make or break, to be honest, because from like a case law perspective, owner occupied is kind of one of those sort of like, if you were to appeal it to court, owner occupied is one of those terms that's already sort of defined and fleshed out through cases. It doesn't mean you couldn't add a definition, but I don't think if you don't define it, it would break the legislation either, because basically you're asking someone to verify in some manner that they own the property, which is fairly established in our country about ownership laws. So again, you could define it from my legal perspective, and maybe the city attorney has a different thought. I don't think you have to define it, because I believe it's one of those terms that's sort of legally already fairly established.
So here's what I'm worried about. I'm not worried about the defining ownership. I'm worried about defining occupancy. In that, if, say, you got somebody who they live in Annapolis, they have that is their primary residence. They also have a house in, make it up, Ocean City, and they spend 30 weeks of the year there. And when they're there, they are renting out their place in Annapolis. So they definitely own it. You could say they occupy it because it's their primary
for
residence.
purposes of tax laws, you do have to declare yourself one word. That's why I'm saying there are other levels of laws at the county, state, and federal level where you can't, generally speaking, be an owner occupied in two residences. You have to, at least for tax purposes if nothing else, you have to pick one.
Right. But if you pick your one as here,
yes,
and
then there are certain requirements that kick in at the federal level to meet that definition. That's what I'm saying. So you can define it, but that sort of those parameters have already been established at much higher legal levels, that you have to pick a residency and you have to meet certain requirements in order to meet that, or you're not considered a resident of that property. And that's already done at a state and a federal level.
I feel like we're talking past each other a little bit. My worry is about somebody who lives here most of the time.
Yeah, but what I'm saying though is at a city, they're going to have to pick one. So if they're going to have to, under federal and state laws, they are going to have to pick one, and certain requirements are going to kick in for how much they have to live there.
Sure.
And it doesn't matter if it's in the same state or different states.
Sure.
So what I'm saying is you can, if you want to create you could create a different definition of owner occupied if you would like. But I'm saying that's already sort of been defined at multiple other legal levels, so that if you don't define it, it won't kill the legislation. But you could be more detailed if you want to.
But I think my worry is that the definition at the federal level for tax purposes would not fully meet our purposes.
Well, and that's the decision you would have to make. But what I'm saying is, from a legal perspective, it's already set out. It's just whether it meets your specific purpose for what you want to do. But you don't have to define it. It's sort of an optional decision.
Do you guys get what I'm saying?
Well,
You would like to. You're thinking owner occupied is perhaps too easy to obtain.
Yes.
At a federal or state level, and so you would like to make it more restrictive.
What we want to say is if you're renting out a spare bedroom, as Alderman Savage said, if you're renting out a bedroom, you're occupying it at that point,
Yeah.
then you're exempt. But if you're renting it out for 2 weeks while even if you live here in Annapolis, you're renting it out for 2 weeks while you're down the shore, that's
You're proposing a more narrow definition
exactly.
than is already established.
Can I make a motion?
Yes, sir.
So I just want, or a request, I guess, because I think it's easy enough to add to this legislation if the law office could see if a definition is needed and just of non-owner of I guess of what owner occupancy means.
Yeah.
And then we could
Yeah, well, because
Add
it's
that
two
in the
different things.
definition.
Owner is owning, and that's done through the deed.
Right.
Occupied is done at more for tax
Yeah.
and other residency
so
purposes.
just define occupied, although that's a common.
I mean,
term
because they
too.
do it at the school level too. For instance, if you're registering a child at a school, you have to indicate primary residency for a number of steps in order to attend that at school. So that, I mean, there are various definitions we can look at. I'm just saying that there's plenty that exist already that require the occupied part.
Yeah, I don't see this becoming an issue just because I think planning and zoning will take an interpretation, and if somebody wants to challenge,
I mean,
it, so be it.
Yeah, you could also, instead of creating a definition, you could give the department the discretion to create policies
Yeah,
or
and then-
procedures.
and
on
they
it.
should do that anyway when this if
Yeah,
it gets
but
passed.
I'm just saying
right?
that-
So yeah, that's a good time for them to do that. They can make an internal definition
Alright.
if they feel they need it.
I don't think we need to do any further.
I think either way, the amendment should pass. And then
Either
the
way.
question is, do we need an additional one?
I think we're fine. So, do we got a favorite recommendation for Amendment 2?
So move.
Second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
There is no Amendment 3, so we're skipping right to Amendment 4. Alderman Savage.
So move.
Second.
For discussion. So this one, it gets to what I was alluding to earlier, and I apologize. I neglected to add the chair to the email list, but I just finished this around, I don't know, 4:30 or so on the train. So this is more, I think, for discussion because it does need to get fully reviewed by the law office. But what my intention is with this is to, like I was saying earlier, actually get to that 10% cap in those areas where we have, again, for example, 20%, 25% short-term rentals on a block. And so the first thing this would do is, which is not at the beginning of it, is set a 2-year implementation deadline. Because right now this would take effect on passage. This would give people 2 years to kind of get a handle of their properties and transition and compliance. At the end of the 2 years, there would start a lottery system. And so before you get to the 2 years, which I talk about on, if you look at number 3F, E and F is a phase in. So it basically says that before this 2-year period hits, that plan of zoning is going to basically make sure all permits, all licenses end at the anniversary date in 2 years, so that the immediate day after they can start the lottery, which is based on the New Orleans, but under 3G, lottery commencement, it goes into how the lottery would work. So on that day, lottery would happen. This would be for all the properties. So from 0 to 25%, if that's what it is, all those under and above the cap would be entered into the lottery. However, the lottery would have a tier. So if you look at page 5 at the top, you'll see different tiers. And so kind of phases too. So the first lottery, tier property, would be property seeking renewal that are owned by Annapolis or Anne Arundel County residents. So this is just for renewal, right? And so this would be existing permit license holders. And I'm trying to emphasize local ownership because I think we've had this discussion before. We would like to see people who live in the city or around it have the ability to have short-term rentals, and I think they should be emphasized prioritized. And so after this tier 1 gets resolved, if there are still spaces available in that 10% cap, it would move on to tier 2, which would be properties that new permits. So this would be new license holders who want to apply, and that would still have to be Annapolis or Anne Arundel County residents. And then tier 3, if there's room left, would be basically folks who are seeking renewal or new licenses who may live outside the city or the county. And so that would be the lottery, so that anybody, that would get us to that 10% within 2 years. Or I'm sorry, at the end of 2 years, we would actually get to that point with that new round of licenses. The other stuff in here just clarifies how the permits can't be transferred, the licenses can't be transferred, and yeah, basically some other language on the license lottery, but that's the general idea. I wanted to kind of get feedback from Midian and the sponsor.
So my understanding is after this 2-year, everybody who has a current existing permit in good standing, those are just available to be renewed as long as they're in good standing. After 2 years, we go into a lottery system where even if I am a city resident with a STR license in good standing, there is still a possibility of me not being able to renew it due to no fault of my own, just lottery did not go my way.
Yeah, that could theoretically happen if there are that many locally owned short-term rentals within a block. Yeah.
Okay. I appreciate what you're trying to do here. I think this might get some pretty significant blowback, potentially legal on us. I am very happy to cut licenses off, but I think when we get into taking things away that are in good standing, that can maybe get us in trouble. But yeah, this one gets uncomfortable for me. So it is certainly an aggressive plan to get it down, though. I appreciate the boldness.
What can I respond to?
Absolutely.
Since because again, my concern is just that we're the only mechanism to actually achieve this 10% goal is through natural attrition. As far as people who just decide to stop having short-term rentals over the years, because I don't even, does the underlying, let me look at the underlying, I'm not even sure if the underlying legislation has a good standing requirement. Does it?
Yeah.
It does. Okay. So that would be the other way, is if people are in bad standing, they won't get their renewals under the current legislation. But
yeah,
again, I think that's just too long of a period. And, they've done this in New Orleans, and there was also another one the law office sent me, can't remember where they had a lottery system. Look, it's not my ward in the sense that I don't think I have any that are over the 10%, but I think one of the important factors perhaps to look at is if we can actually quantify how many short-term rentals on some of these key streets are owned by Annapolis or county residents. Because if that's already underneath the cap, then the only people we would potentially be knocking off the renewal list would be those who are out of city, which, personally, I have less concern about that.
Yeah, I mean, tier 3 would.
Yeah.
Someone in Florida. But
so I guess, and I fully understand if you don't want to take action on this tonight, but I guess that would be one request I'd have of planning and zoning.
I would like some more information from planning and zoning on this one, but as I said, I shall never be the holder of economic matters unless I'm being petty. So I will pass any more commentary to Alderman Huntley and then Alderman Arnett if he has thoughts. Alderman Huntley?
So, yeah, again, I appreciate the boldness, as Alderman Schnellmeyer said. My biggest worry is I really think that if this amendment passes, the bill itself will not hold up. I worry about it passing the full council if this amendment passes, and as Alderman Chandlemeyer said, I worry about litigation, and that's, by the way, exactly what we saw in New Orleans, which I think one of the pieces of logic we had was that the plaintiffs in New Orleans were people who had their STR licenses taken away, and so by using a lot of the language that we, or not the language, but the concept from New Orleans, without having that take them away portion, I think we were hoping to reduce our potential liability. So that's one of my concerns, sort of with the idea overall. That's the biggest one. And there was something else I was going to say on it. But then I'd also just note I've got a bunch of relatively small concerns with the actual text of the amendment, and we could work that out. If it passes, I guess we can work that out as an amendment to the amendment. But for instance, the non-conveyance is already in city code. The short-term rentals not needing this during boat shows and commission week is already in city code. There's just a couple things that I think we could pull out of this amendment.
Okay. Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
So the other thing, my understanding is that the plaintiffs lost the New Orleans suit and the city won. So their lottery system was upheld. So I don't understand any concern about that being a legal challenge if it was already, as long as we craft it correctly. So I guess the question then becomes, would we want to prioritize, do we want to get to that, closer to that 10% cap more quickly, right? That's the political question as far as potential. If we feel like we need to, but again, that's where the phase in comes in. Like if you think we should get to that 10%, maybe we could always extend the phase in instead of 2 years, have it be 3 or 4. But I'd still really like to get to a point, because the 10%, we're most likely, how many years it could be. I don't know how dense some of these communities are with short-term rentals, but it could be 15, 10 years before we actually get to 10%. So it's like, why do this if it's so far out?
So one thing I want to say, sorry, I remembered the other point I was going to make, is there are two mechanisms by which the blocks get down to 10%. One is the attrition, like you mentioned, but the other is that we have a mechanism to remove short-term rental licenses if there are 3 violations of a litany of offenses, and as those occur, if you lose your license, you wouldn't be able to get it back if you're on a block over 10%. So the choice, as I see it here, and again, I really get where you're coming from, Alderman Savage, because I think a lot of people would rather we snap our fingers and get it down to 10% tomorrow. But to me, the choice is, do we want to do it a little bit more slowly, but by weeding out people who are having infractions, or do we want to do it faster, but randomly? And that's a choice for the body to make. But I prefer to do it based off of who is having infractions.
And before I pass the floor to Alderman Arnett, I will, in credit to Alderman Savage's point out that sorry, I had this just up and then I lost it because I ADD brain. The United States District Court for the Eastern District of Louisiana ruled on February 28th, 2024, that the New Orleans lottery system was legal. I do not know if there are further challenges to this or not, but that is worth noting. Alderman Arnett.
Can I just give you a brief? I believe it has been appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals.
Okay. Alderman Arnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I share your feelings of concern. I think I like the idea. I'd like to have it happen quickly, but I really haven't had enough time to digest it fully. But I just feel like it's going to invite some trouble. I'd rather get rid of people because they've had violations, but I worry about this one.
There is one part on here that I absolutely love, and I think it would not cause any issues. I don't know if you're willing to whittle down on the amendment yourself or submit something different. I think this would be much less controversial. Part 4 of this, the transfer of permits, any non-owner occupied short-term rental license on a block face exceeding its cap shall be non-transferable. Transfer, sale, or assignment of the property or license shall cause the short-term rental license to expire at term's end. I think that's very fair and very good, and does strike that balance on speeding it up a little bit, maybe not to what you were hoping with the original amendment, but does put a little more pep in the step and maybe shields us from some of the potential consequences. I can put that in for consideration, but I'm getting shaking of heads from Alderman Hunt.
Only because that's one of the things I was mentioning that's already covered in code.
Okay.
We already have in code that short-term rental licenses, all short-term rental licenses are not transferable.
Oh, I misunderstood the link of it.
And that, yes, I mean, you're totally right that transferring or selling of a property would cause the license to expire. Yeah.
Okay.
And in fact, it wouldn't wait until the term's end. Is how it's written in code currently. Not even in my legislation, but if you sell a property tomorrow, you've got to go. Even if your short-term rental license has another 11 months on it, you've got to go and get a new one. And if the block face was above 10%, you wouldn't be able to get it.
All right. Alderman Savage, do you have any final pieces to say on Amendment 4?
Well, just I will get with the sponsor to tweak the language. I'm probably still going to introduce it because again, I think we need to be. I think we need to get in the practice of being bolder on many of these initiatives. We certainly, I think this is something we've gotten requests to do for a long time now. Some of these folks who live on some of these streets are very, maybe desperate's too strong a word, but they're very determined and experience these impacts. And this does not give them any speedy resolution. And I just want to encourage my colleagues that we can do this in a legally sufficient manner. I think it could warrant being bold. And what I'm going to try to do is get some data from plan and zoning regarding the local ownership, because to the chair's point, I have a lot less sympathy for somebody who lives in Florida who owns a short-term rental up here. That's exactly the kind of thing we need to get rid of. And so if it's legally sufficient, then I'd say we try to do that. And maybe I can tweak some of the priorities to address some of those concerns. But in any case, I'm fine with no action on this. I'll take the feedback and see what I can work up in response.
Can I ask one other question? Mr. Chair, I assume
Yes.
you're okay. Why did you decide to do it as Annapolis or Anne Arundel County residents? I mean, the requirement in code currently is for someone to live in the city if they're going to own it, or have a property manager who lives in the city. So I was just curious why, if there's a reason behind extending it to county residents.
I mean, that's a good point. I was just kind of trying to expand the umbrella to give some sympathy to the county residents. Because again, I don't feel quite as, because I do have some sympathy for them. I don't if they're from out of state per se, but in that case, I do. I'm not strongly committed to that, but that's kind of my initial thinking.
All right. Do I have a motion for no action on Amendment 4?
So moved.
Second, all in favor of no action? Aye.
Aye.
Amendment 5, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second, Alderman Savage.
Okay, so this one. Okay, this is related to the other one. This would be, instead of take effect upon passage, it would have been 2 years. And in the areas where the short-term rentals are over the cap, no new permits would be renewed or issued during this period. Okay, I'd have to tweak that anyway if they went forward with it. But the idea would be to say within that period, for the last amendment kicked in, that there would be no, I'd have to reword it again. So there'd be no new permits beyond that for the, anyway, I'll give it more thought, but we don't have to take action on this matter.
Yeah, this one
We'll
seems
revisit it.
tied to Amendment 4.
It is, yeah.
All right. So motion for no action?
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. Do I have a motion for a favorable recommendation for 01725 as amended?
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Alderman Hunt, congrats. You're out of economic matters.
Hey, see you guys later. I talked about spending affordability this morning with Alderman Arnett. Yeah.
I'm going to be talking about Finance Committee too.
All right. And last but certainly not least, Alderman Arnett, you have been here patiently waiting and contributing to wonderful discussions on economic matters today. 01225, prioritizing affordable spending through expansion of Financial Advisory Commission duties. Sir.
So first of all, let me say I think you've had a very good meeting so far, and I've enjoyed being here and appreciate being allowed to participate. I'll start with the statement of mercy. We had a very good meeting with the Finance Committee this morning, the upshot of which is they've postponed taking any action until September to give me time to work with the Finance Department on several different issues, looking at other vendors and so forth. And I would be quite satisfied with this committee also postponing no action until I do further research. And I'll tell you why in a second, or taking no action. The one thing I will say is I think the legislation is something of a misnomer. It talks about spending affordability. It's really asking for 5-year economic forecasts on revenue outlook. And I think the reason we call it spend affordability is because the state and all the counties in the state use that term. But what we're really asking for is long-term projections. The novel idea that came up at the finance this morning that I really want to pursue was a question brought up by Alderwoman Finlayson saying, why are we doing this through the fact, and I think there are some reasons, but why don't we just contract directly in the finance department for these forecasts? And I think that's a very good question. And it's one of the things that Director Moran and I have agreed to talk about. So I think there could be some radical changes to this legislation as I discuss through July and August, including possibly withdrawing it. But I'd like the time to pursue that with both the finance department and with the FAC. So I would beg your indulgence to either postpone or take no action.
I think with the potential for significant changes, especially entire departments and committees that it'll impact, I think this warrants postponement per your request. I don't want to be debating a bill that will do I don't mind debating a bill that changes a little bit before it's voted on, but I do think we're doing ourselves a disservice that could change as much as you are saying it could.
It could change very much.
Alderman Savage?
Yeah, I'm good with that because I have about 11 changes to send to the Alderman
I withdraw the bill
to address some of the. I think the effort's good. It's not in any way an effort to sabotage it or pull it down. I just think there's some weakly defined language in there, definitions that I'd like to strengthen, and as well as implementation language. So hopefully, I'd like to sit down with you. And
I'd be happy to get that.
I'll send them to you right now, but they're not formatted very well. But
all right. So with that said, do we have a motion to postpone action until our September meeting?
So moved.
Second, all in favor? Aye. Alderman Arnett, thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you for postponing, and We'll see what happens.
All right. Last but certainly not least on the agenda, I have sent to my colleagues the economic development report from Ms. Stewart, who unfortunately was not able to join us tonight, or fortunately, considering this has been the longest Economic Matters hearing we have had, but it was at least quite productive. But I do want to share with you guys, and I don't know, and the public, and I don't know if you all had the opportunity to look at this, some really exciting updates on the Maritime Apprenticeship Program that we put into that we started funding a little bit into last year and also put additional funding into this year. So this is from Hope Stewart herself, when I asked for an update on the program. Over the 2.5 months, we have made excellent progress on establishing an apprenticeship program in the city of Annapolis. MTAM has worked closely with Carl Kaczynski from Anne Arundel Workforce Development Corporation to complete the application that must be accepted by the Maryland Apprenticeship and Training Council to establish our program. This application is quite comprehensive, with many details to iron out. On-the-job work processes. Our employer partners, Port Annapolis Marina and Diversified Marine Services, have approved their respective on-the-job work processes that MTAM, that is the gosh, I hate acronyms. Marine Trades Association of Maryland developed for them. Due to the specific nature of each business, there are separate processes required for each company. While the majority are similar, there are subtle differences in the amount of time dedicated to developing their necessary learning competencies. Both tracks ensure that the skills required to become a competent marine service technician are required. Related instruction. MTAM collaborated with Port Annapolis and Diversified Marine to develop an outline of related instruction that encompasses both in-house training and from approved providers. Apprenticeship wage schedule. Considering the proposed program duration of 1 year, MTAM and its employer partners formulated a progressive compensation rate that will eventually compensate an apprentice with an average $24 per hour wage earned by an experienced marine technician. We engaged in a meeting with Anne Arundel Workforce Development Corporation and Angela Clark, the apprenticeship navigator for Anne Arundel County, and Rose Fish, the Eastern Regional Apprenticeship Navigator with the Maryland Department of Labor, to review our application prior to their scheduled presentation to the council. They are quite satisfied with the detailed application we submitted and intend to present our application in September, contingent upon the submission of the 2025 annual report by Oasis Experiences, the parent company of Diversified Marine, to the MATC, thereby securing favorable standing with the state. We can use the time before September to plan a media campaign announcing the program, develop outreach strategies for applicants, and possibly involve the city of Annapolis in media release. We should be able to get some good pictures at the September MATC meeting. Guys, this is already proving to be really successful. We should be really proud of what we're accomplishing here. We did this. Go us. So with that said, do I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I will second. All in favor? Aye. So long, folks.
Bye.